Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, I'm John, this has been your True Nerd, and welcome to the Many a True Nerd 2017 Game Awards, our top 10 games of 2017. Now, you may recall in 2016 we did a top 12, I couldn't actually get my list down to 10. I got it down to 10 this year, we did it a bit better, albeit we kind of did that by cheating. So before we get to the top 10, we have to get to the special mentions, where we discuss the stuff that isn't in the top 10, but arguably should or shouldn't be for various reasons. Special mention number 1 goes to Stellaris, which you may recall in 2016 was my number 3 game of the year, whereas Civilization 6 was number 1. However, I specifically flagged at that point there was a very real possibility that if Stellaris kept getting better and they kept polishing it, then it might well ultimately turn out to be better than Civilization 6. Yeah, it didn't actually take that long, in fact. You see, Civilization 6 has spent the entirety of 2017 basically doing nothing but releasing overpriced leader packs one at a flipping time that generally get hugely negative reviews on Steam and are very, very overpriced for, just one leader and one civilization that don't really add anything into the game. Stellaris, meanwhile, on top of finding some big, interesting new content packs like Utopia and Synthetic Dawn and Leviathans, together with just some little cosmetic stuff if you want little cosmetic stuff, has also been releasing constant little free patches, improving, optimizing, changing, and just making the game better and better and better. So I'm going to retroactively go back in time and demote Civilization 6 to be number 3 on my 2016 awards, and Stellaris gets promoted up to number 1. Stellaris has now been retroactively made my top game of 2016. Special mention number 2 goes to Fallout 4 VR, which is not in the top 10 for this year. Should it be? Oh, that was such an interesting question. I agonized over it for quite a while. Okay, so let's talk about Fallout 4 VR. The thing about Fallout 4 VR is it is an incredible experience. It is probably the most ambitious VR game ever attempted, and it is genuinely a pleasure to play. It is great fun. I will never forget it. It's, just one of the most interesting, ridiculously ambitious VR games, and when it's good, it's amazing. However, it's also downright broken in other aspects. The Pip-Boy is nearly unusable. Crafting is horrible. Teleportation, especially when combined with VATS, breaks game progression at multiple instances, and I think I kind of showed that off pretty well in the Boston's Lava Challenge. Now you've just got these ridiculous long horizontal double jumps just through thin air. It's just absolutely baffling. It just doesn't feel like it was properly tested to see whether it would actually impact, the actual mechanical flow. And just in case, the double jumping teleports aren't actually breaking the game enough, there's actually nothing in the game to stop you literally using room scale VR to just walk straight through locked doors and just kind of reaching straight through locked containers to get to the cryolator early and stuff like that. There's a lot that just is straight up, pretty much broken in Fallout 4 VR. So while it's incredible, I'll never forget it and I had a wonderful time playing it, unfortunately it couldn't go in the top 10. There's just too much wrong with it that needs fixing for the time being. Special mention number 3 goes to Orwell, which technically came out in 2016, but I only played it in 2017. So retroactively go back and add that into the 2016 list, because Orwell's amazing, so it deserves some credit here. Special mention number 4 goes to Victorum, which is not in the top 10. I kind of needed to revise my opinion down a bit about that one. I got a bit excited about that one. I thought it was absolutely amazing. Then I went back and played it again, and it kind of lacks replayability. Fantastic game, great fun, lovely to actually just kind of play for a little bit, but it needs a fair bit of work to make it more replayable yet. For the time being, it just lacks depth. It's a really hilariously good fun tinker toy, but not quite top 10 material. And finally, the special little bonus awards for games that I'm not really putting in my top 10 because I don't really feel like they're ready yet. These games will almost certainly be making an appearance when they come out properly in 2018 or 19 or whenever they actually get round to coming out, but special awards go to Abandoned Ship, Frostpunk, and House Flipper, all of which I think, if they actually are, got right and worked on and polished up a bit, could all be absolutely fantastic and spectacular, but are not quite ready to actually, be included in this list. Largely because some of them haven't even actually come out yet, so it will be a bit odd to put them in the 2017 games of the year. And speaking of those games of the year, let's do the games of the year, doing it in kind of traditional ascending order. So, number 10, The Red Stare, a VR game, and not the only VR game on this list, in fact. This has really been a year where VR, to my mind, started making some really interesting strides forward, and actually started trying to find its feet a little bit, because there is more than one VR game on this top 10 list, and I would not have predicted that at the beginning of this year. The red stare is largely here because the red stare basically takes VR and does it right, which is VR needs to completely take gaming, throw large parts of it out, and reinvent it anew. You can't just take existing concepts and make them VR, because basically you run into things that do work normally and don't work in VR, and vice versa, which is part of the problem with Fallout 4 VR, which is why the red stare gets to be in the top 10 and Fallout 4 VR doesn't. Fallout 4 VR tries to shoehorn traditional gaming stuff into the VR setting even if it doesn't work very well. The red stare basically starts with a blank slate and comes up with something really, really flipping interesting. The red stare was, as a reminder, basically a McCarthy conspiracy simulator where you play a private detective in an apartment with a camera with a zoom lens, basically observing this set of apartments across the street from you, zooming in and taking pictures of important things and conspiracies and trying to figure out who was who was a patriot, who was a spy, who was actually an enemy agent, who was a collaborator with the enemy agents, stuff like that, based on information that was sent to you by phones. You just had to kind of observe, watch. You had a little blackboard next to you so you could turn to your blackboard and kind of slap the actual photos that you actually took with your camera, because it was like an instant printing camera thingy, whatever one of those, Polaroid. Wait, Polaroid? No, Polaroid. Polaroid was right. I was right the first time. Yeah, you just basically print off the Polaroid pictures, slap them up. You've got a pen, you can write things next to them so you can actually make notes about the conspiracy and what you think. Fantastic idea, well executed. Couldn't be any higher than this because technically and graphically it is a little bit on the scruffy side and definitely need a bit of polishing yet, but fantastic idea and pretty much the perfect example of how to do a VR game right. Number 9, Time Recoil. Time Recoil is by 10 Tons Limited, the same guys who have made basically a ton of really fast top-down shooters I've really enjoyed. They also made Jidge and Neon Chrome. Loved both of them as well. Basically, this is a studio that knows how to make a really good, hyper-violent, explosive top-down twin-stick shooter and just keeps making them over and over. But I don't care, because they're really good at it. They're just a studio that's found one thing they're amazing at and just does it over and over again. But Time Recoil, to my mind, is actually my favourite, because yeah, that's the one where they actually mixed in time slowing mechanics where you actually gain slow time for murdering people in quick succession, all sorts of kind of like dash zooming and murdering like that. It's just a pleasure to play, a rapid paced hyper violent twin stick shooter that I just found myself going back to a few times after I actually made the video. Great fun little game, maybe not the most deep thing on this list, but just hilariously good fun. Number 8, and this one's probably going to surprise you, Beast Battle Simulator, which is making its appearance for pretty much one reason and one reason only. And that reason is why this is here, whereas Ultimate Epic Battle Simulator never came anywhere near my top 10. I believe that was in 2016 actually. I think that would have been showing up last year, but didn't. And that's because of the football mode. I can't really kind of not let the football mode be acknowledged. Basically adding in a whole bunch of animals and dinosaurs and automatic weaponry and fixed gun turrets and stuff, and then basically just tossing down a massive football, having everything charge at the football, and then having them play a game of football. Oh, it was just beautiful. I don't think I've actually laughed so hard as I have when I was just kind of doing the Beast Battle Simulator World Cup. In fact, those actually might be my 2 favourite videos this entire year. It was just such a beautifully thought up mode. So okay, fine, it's probably a stupid, ridiculous, broken game, but it just had just such a glorious, glowing idea. It had to get acknowledged here, because I don't think anyone's actually ever come up with a better idea for a side mode than the football mode in Beast Battle Simulator. Number 7, Hitman Patient Zero. Should this be here? I don't know if this should be here. Hitman just kind of keeps coming out and has kind of been coming out consistently every month for the past 2 years, and Hitman has previously been on my Games of the Year list, so I'm not sure this should really be here, but I kind of feel like this should be here, because this is actually the first thing Hitman has put out since Hitman parted companies from Square Enix and is now being independently published from IO Interactive. So this was basically the first thing IO did with the Hitman franchise after they actually got the actual IP back, and I've got to say, it's very, very promising and exciting. And there's 2 reasons for that. One is actually within the game and one is actually without the game. Outside of the game, basically, they started saying, okay, let's throw this episodic thing in the bin. How about you pay a bit of money up front and we give you a campaign where you get all the missions immediately and they just kind of form a great big group of things that you can play together, which is, I'm pretty sure, what a large number of Hitman fans actually wanted. I personally didn't care so much about that. I felt like Hitman was one of the very few games that was actually eminently qualified to be an episodic release, because if you made massive levels, then you could just replay them over and over and find all the different ways of executing people and do the elusive targets that were a really fun idea to actually kind of, you know, fill up the gaps between the releases of the episodes and the new levels. But lots of people didn't like that, so I feel like IO Interactive are probably back on the right track as far as most people are concerned there. But within the game itself, Patient Zero basically deserves to be acknowledged, because Patient Zero is, to my mind, going back and replaying it, I think it might actually be pretty much as good as Hitman's ever been. Sapienza may, to my mind, still be pretty much like the best level they ever made in Hitman, but the problem with the Hitman is in, like, Hitman 2015 and also 16 and then a bit of 17, but this is different. The problem with Square Enix Hitman, anyway, was because it was so absolutely massive and there were so many different opportunities and assassinations actually going on in each mission, that meant the wait times could be quite flipping long, because if you needed a character to actually get to a certain point of their routine or their loop to actually do a particular opportunity, you could very easily just be standing there waiting for 5 minutes sometimes, just waiting for them to get through the level, just because the levels were so big, and then you needed to go through all these different opportunities in case you wanted to go for any individual one of them. So sometimes the original Hitman, though it was amazing, could be a bit on the slow side. Patient Zero scales things down a bit. The levels are a bit smaller, they're a bit tighter, there's not quite so many opportunities going on, but in some ways it feels a bit more like Blood Money, kind of a halfway house between Blood Money and Hitman of 2015, and to my mind that's actually pretty much optimal. And that's before we had other fun stuff about Hitman Patient Zero, like the fact they've made sniping a more important part of it, which is marvellous because sniping was a bit underrepresented in the original 2015 release. And then there were other really fun little new mechanics added in, like say in the second new mission in Sapienza, they had the time limit where there was actually going to be a fixed meeting at a set time, and you could either kind of stop that meeting happening by destroying the bell, or you could actually kind of force the meeting to occur early by causing the bell to ring earlier. And then of course there was the finale in Japan, which may just be my favourite ending to any Hitman game ever, with the actual spreading pandemic through the level. That was just flipping beautiful. To my mind, Hitman Patient Zero is partly here because it shows that the Hitman franchise is in very, very good hands. Now it's back being independently published by IO Interactive, and I cannot wait to see what they're planning to do in 2018. Number 6, Atom RPG. Many games have inspirations that are very, very obvious indeed. But very often when a new game takes an older game that it very overtly wants to try and shadow and update and be like, you end up with an inferior copy. Because trying to emulate something very rarely comes up with results as good as if someone with a brand new vision of their own actually tried to execute on that vision. Atom RPG, however, is a rare example, in fact actually it's pretty much the only example I can really think of, where a team looked at Fallout, tried to take the old school Fallout 1 and Fallout 2 ethos, updated a bit with some modern Fallout, specifically lots of Fallout New Vegas-y style ideas, blend those together, and they actually got it. They understood what made Fallout great, and they actually managed to come up with something, if not quite up to the level of classic Fallout, was looking very, very promising indeed. Everything that I liked in old Fallout games, and indeed in more modern Fallout games too, felt like it was represented. Great little game that even from its earliest demo was looking very, very exciting indeed. I believe it has just actually entered early access, so expect that to return to the channel for a bit more love and attention in future. Number 5, Bomber Crew. Everyone likes keeping plates spinning, right? Keeping plates spinning is great fun. Bomber Crew is an incredibly stressful game, ludicrously stressful game. I kind of made a vague FTL comparison when I spoke about it originally, but that's not really fair. Instead, it's basically about being constantly under stress, constantly under fire, and having to do 20 million things at once. Simultaneously putting out fires, repairing systems, trying to tag enemy fighters, trying to keep on the right heading to go and find an enemy base, making sure you're at the right altitude, that your navigator can actually do his job correctly, actually bombing or taking photographs of the right thing. It's an incredibly messy game where everything goes wrong constantly, and it's just beautiful. And also surprisingly poignant. For a game that's basically got no real story whatsoever, it's, yeah, surprisingly moving. The story's just kind of there in the background, and I absolutely love the touch of having the actual statue of your crew in the present day on the start screen. That's just absolutely lovely. A gorgeous game that does what it wants to do incredibly well, well deserving of a place here. Number 4, Heat Signature. Oh, I adore Heat Signature. Heat Signature is a ridiculous, runny roundy, blowy everything uppy, ludicrously creative game. And it's here because it rewards creativity. You're basically just given a massive great area to explore with loads of extremely dangerous guards in it who can pretty much kill you in one hit. You're then given a ton of exciting, sexy toys like teleporters and time slowers and cloaking devices. Okay, now get from this point on this side of the ship to 10 miles in that direction in the next 30 30 seconds using all these exciting sexy toys and liberal use of the pause button. It's basically just a huge rewarding challenging game that massively rewards experimentation and creativity, and absolutely deserves to be the highest ranking indie game of this year. Number 3, Superhot VR. And if you told me a VR game was going to be flipping in the top 3 of my games of the year at the beginning of 2017, ooh, I would not have believed you. But basically Superhot VR is pretty much the perfect VR game. Unlike Fallout 4 VR, it scales things down. It doesn't worry about having a big, complex kind of world to move around in. It simply has you in a bunch of scenarios where you simply are standing in a particular area, you have to carefully dodge out of the way of bullets, and the Superhot basic gimmick of the world only moves while you're moving works even better in VR than it does outside of it, where if you literally hold your hands in your head perfectly still, the world is frozen. However, just reaching for theoretical weapons close by to you makes the world just ever so slightly speed up. It's beautiful. It's just a great big Matrix fantasy where you can dodge bullets. It's wonderful to be firing weapons and throwing things in super slow motion. Once you actually fired off a bullet or thrown a projectile, you need to basically have time moving for it to actually move, which gives you an excellent opportunity to dance in VR, which is another very, very important part of VR, that it gives you an opportunity to dance. Basically, as far as I'm concerned, it's the best VR game I've ever played. It's absolutely magnificent, and I struggle to see how it's going to be beaten by anything other than a sequel, because pretty much it just does everything right. Number 2, Total War Warhammer 2. Now, this might surprise a few people, because I would suspect a few people are expecting this to be at number 1. I was expecting this to be at number 1, to be honest. The thing about Total War Warhammer 2, even though actually it's the most fun I've had with a new Total War release in some time, I definitely enjoyed it a lot more than I did the original Total War Warhammer. It has problems. It is not a perfect game. In particular, the Vortex campaign has the issue that it makes the whole thing feel a little bit rushed. Like, for example, after I'd done one of the Vortex rituals, I felt like by the time it was done, I was already more than halfway to the next Vortex ritual. So it was just being constantly spammed with Skaven armies and Chaos armies. It just felt like I was being a bit too much of a passive victim of circumstance rather than actually forging the empire I wanted to go out and forge. Some other mechanics were mildly annoying as well. The Skaven food mechanic weirdly disincentivizes you from actually expanding or confederating as the Skaven. The AI seems to be able to confederate freely, and the AI cheating is really, really obvious in this game, particularly in the Vortex campaign, where the AI just basically gets given free ritual resource, even though they blatantly shouldn't be allowed to have it, together with just spawning of massive armies they blatantly shouldn't be able to afford. The AI is always cheated in Total War, but this is a particularly obvious example of it, and it does slightly great. Combine that with the fact that Mortal Empires wasn't actually ready at launch, and even now is still in a slightly unfinished state, and now there's a timescale that leads all the way out to May 2018 before that's actually going to be in a state that most people are probably expecting it to be in at launch. Yeah, there's some problems with Total War Warhammer 2. Fantastic game. I shouldn't actually kind of focus on the negatives too much. It's still a brilliant game. The battles are great fun. I love how different the factions all feel. The core mechanics of provinces and the way building works now, and the way the rights work now, and the way the stances work now. It feels about as polished as Total War's ever been, but there are just enough small problems. I couldn't quite allow this to be my game of the year for 2017. And speaking of my game of the year 2017, number 1 is Prey. Prey was always going to be high up. Prey is a fantastic game. In fact, Prey is pretty much a perfectly formed shooter action RPG thing that, at the risk of damning it with faint praise, pretty much does everything just about right. It's a shooter where the guns feel weighty and satisfying to use. It's got great pistols, great shotgun, all sorts of good weapons, full stop. The enemies are a creative bunch. There's fun different tactics to deal with them. There's some really fun creative guns. In particular, the glue gun deserves shouting out because that thing's just absolutely flipping hilarious. It's also an action game with a nice open world. It never really descends into corridor shooting. Exploration is always rewarded. You always find some good useful stuff for actually having a dig around in the dark corners. And there's also a surprising amount of flexibility in how you choose to navigate the world, not just in the sense that, say, in the way that Deus Ex would, there's just an obvious air vent that you can actually climb into to bypass a room or to bypass certain enemies, but actually that the game is absolutely open to you using the specialist tools in your possession to actually create new ways to progress, like using the glue cannon to create new platforms and new stairways that shouldn't actually be there. The game's totally up for you basically finding your own ways through the level. It's very, very open indeed to the player exploring, experimenting, and does tend to reward that, which is very, very welcome. And on top of that, it's also an RPG where the upgrade system, even if it's a little bit on the simple side, you do genuinely feel the benefit of every upgrade that you take. There's some really fun, powerful upgrades to be had, and they really do make a difference to your playstyle. And into that, fantastic audio design, great sound effects, great enemy noises, really great score in general, great plot, great voice acting. The actual level design in terms of the aesthetics are beautiful. The aesthetics of the whole ship look absolutely gorgeous. The whole thing's just the full package. If I have one complaint, it's in the third act. There's a tiny bit too much backtracking. There's a few minor subquests that get added in that just kind of send you back to previous areas where you're not really doing anything but wandering back for areas that have now become repopulated with enemies. And yeah, the repopulation by enemies happens too quickly and is a little bit on the annoying side. But that was never enough to put me off, because the context through the plot is just so good, it kept me wanting to actually 100% the game. One little moment that particularly sticks by me is at one point you run into a prisoner, where basically you understand that he's in a cage to be fed to one of the alien monstrosities, and if you do actually feed him to the alien monstrosity, there's an excellent chance that he'll be converted into a useful material you can use for upgrades. Very much like, say, Adam and Little Sisters in Bioshock. But whereas in Bioshock, I never really hesitated because I felt any moral pangs about the whole thing, reading the list of what his crimes were, and whether or not those crimes might or might not be fabricated, and then listening to him pleading for his life as you go through the long 4-stage process to feed him to the alien. I genuinely started feeding him to the alien, but then just before I got to the 4th and final stage where I'd actually push the release button and condemn him to death, I actually changed my mind. I genuinely had my mind changed because I couldn't actually bear to go through with it. The voice acting, the scripting, the plot, the setup, it was just so well done. I genuinely was made to reconsider what was right or wrong to do in a game just by a bit of story in a game. And that very rarely happens. So, Prey, to my mind, a well-deserved winner of the 2017 Many a True Nerd Game Awards. So there you are, ladies and gentlemen, that is my top 10 of the year. Hopefully nothing too excessively controversial there, though hopefully also a few surprises. I think there were actually, there's quite a few indie games on my list this year, and well-deserved too. It's always nice to see the indies give the big lads a run for their money. So feel free to rush down to the comments now and yell at me if you think I've got this horribly wrong. You probably flipping do. And we will, of course, be back next year for the 2018 Game Awards, assuming YouTube hasn't died by that point. Hopefully it won't have done. But in the meantime, I've been John. This has been Many a True Nerd, and this has been the Many a True Nerd Top 10 Games of 2017. Thank you very much, and goodbye. This is the face of death, okay? This is what my sudden death looks like. Do not engage before we arrive. Do not engage. What are you doing? I specifically said don't. Oh, no.
No, John.
Oh, he likes that. The Romans touched me.